What if the greatest threat to Iran's survival is not the missiles flying over its cities, not the aircraft crossing its airspace, and not the warships gathering in the Persian Gulf, but a battlefield the Islamic Republic has been fighting for nearly a century? A battlefield hidden inside its own borders. Iran believed it understood this conflict. The formula was simple: control the mountains, control the checkpoints, control the population, and when resistance appeared, crush it before it could become something larger. But something has changed, because the mountains along Iran's western frontier are no longer just a border. They are becoming a strategic pressure point, a place where history, military weakness, and political frustration are colliding at the same moment. And the question is no longer whether Iran can defeat another isolated uprising. The question is whether Tehran can survive fighting a war on multiple fronts at the same time. Airstrikes. Something else has been forming quietly in the shadows. A new Kurdish coalition. A new command structure. And possibly the most organized internal challenge the Islamic Republic has faced in decades. The hero of this story is not a fighter jet. It is not even an army. The hero is a place. The Zagros Mountains. A massive chain of rugged terrain stretching across western Iran and into Iraq. These mountains have protected communities that central governments struggled to fully control. And today, those same mountains are becoming the stage for a different kind of warfare. A war where geography itself becomes a weapon. Look at a satellite image of western Iran. The first thing you notice is not cities. It is the terrain. A wall of mountains, deep valleys, narrow roads, few easy roads. It looks almost designed for irregular warfare. And that is the first contradiction. Iran has one of the largest militaries in the Middle East. Drones, special forces, a powerful security apparatus. But here's the problem. Military strength does not always translate into control, especially when the battlefield is not an open desert. It is a mountain range where every road can become an ambush point. Every village can become an intelligence network. Terrain does not just shape battles. It shapes what kind of war is possible. And the Zagros Mountains have always created the same strategic problem for Tehran. They limit the power of the state, while increasing the power of local networks. But this conflict did not begin in 2026. The roots go back almost a century. In 1946, Kurdish leaders declared the short-lived Republic of Mahabad. For less than 1 year, it represented something extraordinary. A Kurdish political entity inside Iran. A symbol that Kurdish identity could survive even under powerful central governments. The republic collapsed. Iranian forces retook control. Its leaders were executed. But the idea did not disappear, because movements are not always defeated when their armies disappear. Sometimes they survive through memory, and for many Kurdish political groups in Iran, Mahabad became more than history. It became a symbol. A reminder that political autonomy had once been attempted, and could potentially be attempted again. For decades afterward, Iranian Kurdish movements followed a repeating cycle. Get suppressed. The Shah's government fought them. The Islamic Republic fought them. But the pattern depended on one thing: a strong Iranian security state with enough attention and resources to focus on the western frontier. And that is where the current situation becomes different. Because Iran is no longer fighting only one war. The cameras are focused on the sky, but the ground underneath is changing. Tehran's military attention has been concentrated on external threats: American aircraft, Israeli operations, missile strikes, nuclear facilities, air defense systems. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps built its entire security structure around responding to those threats. But while radar screens were watching the skies, Another process was happening in the mountains. Opposition groups that had spent decades divided began doing something they had struggled to do before. They began coordinating. And that changes the equation. Because the biggest weakness of Iranian Kurdish movements historically was not motivation. It was fragmentation. Different groups. Different leadership. Different priorities. Iran understood this. A divided opposition is easier to contain. A unified one is a completely different problem. And then, in early 2026, that began to change. Several major Iranian and Kurdish factions moved toward a joint political and military framework. The coalition included groups with very different histories. The Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, the Kurdistan Freedom Party, the Kurdistan Free Life Party, Komale, and other Kurdish organizations. For the first time in modern memory, groups that had spent decades competing with each other were attempting to coordinate under one umbrella. And that created a new question. Could Iran's old counter-insurgency strategy work against a movement that was no longer divided? Because this was not simply another armed group appearing in the mountains. This was a network. And networks are harder to destroy than armies. An army has headquarters, bases. A network has something different. Connections, information, local support, the ability to disappear. And this is where the story moves from history into strategy. Because the real danger for Tehran is not only the fighters carrying weapons, it is the environment that allows those fighters to survive. The western provinces of Iran contain millions of Kurdish citizens. Many Kurdish organizations have long argued that these communities have faced political restrictions, economic disadvantages, and cultural pressure. The Iranian government disputes many of these claims and frames Kurdish armed groups as security threats supported by foreign powers. But strategically, insurgencies are rarely created by weapons alone. They grow when weapons meet existing grievances. And when a government is already under pressure, those grievances can become much harder to contain. The part most people miss is that Iran's challenge is not simply military. Because suppressing an armed group is one problem. Suppressing the conditions that allow an armed group to gain influence is another. And those are two very different missions. Now the battlefield begins to move. From the mountains, to command centers, to decision makers. Because shortly after the Kurdish coalition began forming, the wider regional war created an unexpected opening. Iran was forced to divide attention between external enemies and internal security. And that created the central contradiction of this entire story. Iran's security system was designed to prevent exactly this situation. A powerful state facing multiple pressure points simultaneously. But what happens when the system built to stop internal instability becomes overloaded by external conflict? That question became real as clashes increased in western Iran. Near areas such as Mohammad and Paran-Shah, fighting between Kurdish armed groups and Iranian security forces intensified. These were not symbolic demonstrations. They involved armed engagements, ambushes, counter-menace operations, and attacks on security positions. Each individual incident was familiar. Iran had dealt with similar violence before. But the pattern was different. The geography was wider. And the political environment was completely different. The conflict was happening while Iran was already under enormous pressure elsewhere. And that creates the next question. Is this another cycle of Kurdish resistance that Tehran can eventually suppress? Or is something deeper happening? Because the biggest mistake in war is always the same. Looking only at the battle in front of you, while missing the system changing underneath it. The system may already be shifting. Everyone watching this conflict from the outside sees the same images. Mountain fighters, Iranian security forces, drones crossing into Iraqi Kurdistan. A familiar cycle repeating itself. But the part most people miss is that this may not actually be a traditional insurgency story. Because insurgencies are usually about territory, this one may be about something more important. The ability of a state to focus its power, and the ability of an opponent to force that power to divide. Everyone thinks this battle is about Kurdish fighters challenging Iranian security forces. But the real battle is about whether Iran can maintain control when every pressure point begins demanding a response at the same time. This is the moment where the battlefield changes. The mountains are still there. The fighters are still there. But the strategic meaning is different. Because the Zagros Mountains are no longer just a physical location. They have become a test of Iran's entire security architecture. For 40 years, the Islamic Republic built a system designed around one central idea. Any internal challenge must be isolated before it becomes a national threat. A protest here, a militant group there, a border incident somewhere else. Each problem could be separated, contained. But modern conflicts rarely stay separated. A drone strike affects politics. A political crisis affects military decisions. A military deployment creates economic pressure. And economic pressure creates more political instability. The battlefield becomes a system, not a location. And that is the invisible battlefield forming inside Iran. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps remains one of the most capable security organizations in the region. It has experience, manpower, drones, and decades of counter-insurgency operations. But here is the contradiction. The same organization designed to control instability depends on concentration. It works best when it can focus overwhelming force on one problem. But a state fighting multiple problems at once faces a different equation. Every soldier sent west is a soldier unavailable somewhere else. Every intelligence asset focused on one threat leaves another area less covered. Every drone strike against an opposition position reveals another strategic problem. The government is reacting. And in warfare, constant reaction is usually a sign that the opponent has changed the rhythm of the conflict. The lesson here is that strategic pressure is not always created by destroying enemy forces. Sometimes it is created by forcing an enemy to spend power everywhere. A military can survive losing equipment, but it struggles when it loses freedom of choice. And that leads to the second layer. Because this war is not only being fought in mountain valleys, it is being fought through perception. Across the region and around the world, every battlefield has two maps: the physical map and the psychological map. On the physical map, Iran is fighting armed groups along its western border. On the psychological map, Tehran is fighting a different battle. It must convince its own population that the state remains in control. Because governments do not survive only through weapons. They survive through belief. The moment citizens begin questioning whether the state can protect itself, the security challenge changes. A small armed group can become a symbol. A local clash can become a national message. A mountain ambush can become evidence that the government is losing its ability to control events. And this is why information warfare matters. The weapon is not only the rifle. The weapon is the image, the message, the perception that something is changing. But here is where the story becomes more complicated. Because the Kurdish coalition itself faces major challenges. Unity does not automatically create victory. History is full of opposition movements that appeared strong at the beginning, but collapsed because of internal divisions. Different groups have different goals, different ideologies, different relationships with outside powers. And this creates another contradiction. The coalition's greatest strength is its diversity, but its greatest weakness may also be its diversity. A movement can unite against a common enemy. The harder question is what happens after that. Because defeating a government and replacing a government are two completely different strategic problems. The mountains of western Iran do not exist in isolation. They sit at the intersection of Iran, Iraq, and every neighboring government has its own concerns. Iraq worries about sovereignty. Turkey worries about Kurdish armed groups expanding their influence. The United States sees potential strategic value in pressure against Tehran. Iran sees foreign interference. Every actor is looking at the same mountains, but each one sees a different future. And that is what makes this battlefield so dangerous. Because local conflicts rarely remain local when geography connects major powers. The bigger picture is that the Zagros Mountains represent a much larger question about modern warfare. Can a powerful state control every battlefield at once? Because the answer may define future conflicts far beyond Iran. Look at the world today. Major powers are discovering that military dominance does not automatically create political control. Russia has learned that battlefield strength does not guarantee strategic success. The United States has repeatedly discovered that defeating military targets is easier than reshaping political outcomes. And Iran may now be facing its own version of this problem. The ability to strike is not the same as the ability to stabilize. A missile can destroy a building. A drone can eliminate a commander. An aircraft can dominate the sky. But none of those automatically solve the political environment that created resistance. That is the hidden battlefield. The battlefield underneath the battlefield. And this is why Western Iran matters. Because the question is not only whether Kurdish fighters can survive. The deeper question is whether Iran's entire security model can adapt. For decades, Tehran relied on a simple formula: strong center, controlled borders, rapid suppression. But modern warfare is changing. The strongest weapon may no longer be the largest missile. It may be the ability to create uncertainty, to force decisions, to stretch resources, to make a government respond faster than it can plan. A small force with limited weapons can create strategic effects if it forces a much larger opponent to constantly adjust. That does not guarantee success, but it changes the calculation. And that is why the Zagros Mountains have become important. Not because they are the largest battlefield, but because they expose a weakness that exists in every powerful state. Every empire eventually faces the same problem. Too many fires, too many decisions, too many directions. And the question becomes, which one receives attention first? Because the greatest threat is not always the enemy you can see. Sometimes it is the pressure you cannot ignore. As this conflict develops, the world will watch the weapons, the clashes, but the more important signals may be somewhere else. Watch the political messaging. Watch whether Tehran continues treating this as a border problem, or begins treating it as a national security crisis. Because that difference reveals how leaders truly see the threat. The question is no longer whether Iran can defeat another isolated armed group. The real question is whether a state designed to control instability can survive when instability begins appearing in multiple places at the same time. Because the future of warfare may not be decided only by who has the strongest army. It may be decided by who can manage the most pressure without losing control. So the question for you: do you think future conflicts will be won by the side with the most powerful weapons, or by the side that can create the greatest strategic pressure with the fewest resources?